Battlefield 6 is here, and I've had access to this game now for about a week long, which I'm sure is going to annoy some of you. But the lovely folks over at EA and DICE let me get access to Battlefield 6 long before its release, not only to bring you guys a fresh set of settings, which you're going to get in this video today with all of the testing that I've achieved in that time, but also lots of other really good content as well. So please make sure you're subscribed and drop a like. We are very much on the road to 200k, and we have lots of live streams, short form content, and long form content for you here on this channel for Battlefield 6. Now, the last time I did this video, it ended up being a bit of an internet surge, with lots of other content creators pretty much just copy and pasting what I said, and not really doing any of their own testing. And chances are they might just copy and paste that previous video again, which is definitely not the way to go forward. Now, I've actually gone ahead over the last week and tested every single response curve, every single dead zone, every single minor detail to bring you guys the most responsive and reactive controller experience in Battlefield 6, as well as other key gameplay settings that have to be changed in order to get the best out of this game. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, the menus still are a bit of a mess, and it isn't something that is going to improve anytime soon by the looks of it, but what I can tell you is that the developers have actually been talking to me about this stuff, and I've given them lots of suggestions, some of which actually have been implemented, some of which are also going to be implemented in the future that I'm not at liberty to talk about at this current moment in time. But if you are a controller player, on day one, you're going to get a really good responsive experience from this settings video, and further down the line, we're going to get more customization options that are going to allow us even more fine-tuned control. Another big thing that's changed since the last time this beta video happened is that aim assist has been further tuned in this video, and you'll see that now when you dive into Battlefield 6, aim assist is now more representative of the actual character model itself, and not some random invisible orb around your opponent. And because of that, you actually need a finer tuned control to get the best out of your controller. So without further ado, let's dive on into the settings and let you guys know everything that you need. So to start with, I've tested all of this on a DualSense Edge, I've also tested an Xbox Elite controller, and I've also tested a number of third-party controllers like the GameSeer, and all of them came to pretty much the same conclusion. To start with, we're going to go into the controller settings menu, and we're going to start off very basically with this first page. I will have an entire separate segment of this video to talk about the individual bindings, which I feel are also quite important, but let's nail down the basics and fundamentals first. First and foremost, in controller settings, I play at 40 sensitivity. Now, for reference sake, in Call of Duty, I play about a 1.4 sensitivity, which is traditionally somewhere around an 8 to a 10 before they changed it to a decimal value. So you can adjust this slider up and down and have a play around with it in the training range once you dial in the rest of the settings. Field of view, I personally play at 110, I sit in front of a 27-inch monitor, and this works for me. If you're on a larger display or sitting further away, you may want to change this value to something that allows you to see magnified enemies over distance, but isn't too super wide so that everything is just basically a speck of dust. Now, these next three settings are actually working as intended out of the box. It's worth checking them to see if they've changed, or if something's gone wrong in terms of the setup process, but DICE and EA actually did listen to me and implemented changing these values to 56 on and 178 by default, meaning that you don't have to touch them yourselves. Now, double check them just to make sure they're all there and that it's all gone through accordingly, but these should just be set properly as they should have in the original beta. Moving on, we have the infantry aim input curve. Now, I have tried every single one of these settings. I'm not kidding, I've gone through all of them, I've done the data, I've done the testing, I've done the aim training, and this is the best combination I have found. You want to select Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4, and if you are a Battlefield 4 or Battlefield 1 player, this is going to feel incredibly familiar, but I'm going to give you a more responsive version of those controls. Now, I personally love Battlefield 1 and I love Battlefield 4, but the big issue with those games is that at times, in at least Battlefield 1, it felt very sluggish, and on the inverse of that, in Battlefield 4, the gunplay actually felt too snappy in places because of the lack of any kind of acceleration. And when you don't have any acceleration on your input curve, you end up having this really mouse-like movement which doesn't completely suit a controller to a T. So you're going to select Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4 in infantry aim input curve, you're going to go further down to stick input acceleration presets and select BF4, BF3, or BF Bad Company. Now, there is a small chance that on different versions of this game, like Xbox and PlayStation versions of this game, these may be named slightly differently. But essentially, so long as you see Battlefield 4 in both of these options, you're in the right place. Next, you're going to want to move this down to 12. Now, what this will do is give you a small amount of acceleration before the stick itself actually reaches the full input. Now, if you put this value all the way down to 0, you're going to get super snappy left and right gameplay. If you put it really high, you're going to get really sluggish, slow to respond kind of gameplay that feels a little bit more like Battlefield 1 out of the box. I think 12 is perfect, and it's the value that I would recommend everybody uses, and then I recommend you actually change your sensitivity, not your aim acceleration rate. Let this be a universal cue that is just by default quite responsive, and adjust your sensitivity up and down if you find yourself feeling a little bit too erratic in places. Moving on, these are the settings I've got from these. Ultimately, not huge here, just that I have double tap crouch for sprint glide turn off, and there are a couple of other settings that I will run you through as we go through these menus to show you what exactly I'm working with. Further down, you're going to have different types of infantry zoom sensitivity types. I do not like changing all of these one by one. I think it doesn't build muscle memory, so I set this down to 86. I think 86 gives you just enough slowdown that it makes you a little bit more accurate, but not too much slowdown that it feels like you're firing a completely different weapon, or not too fast that it's one-to-one with your hip fire. This is a really nice middle ground, and I would highly recommend 86 for this value for everybody. Now, don't be confused if you see that my zoom is listed as L1 instead of L2. I personally swap my triggers and bumpers, and we'll go over that in the actual controller mapping section as well. Scrolling on down, we have Prioritize Interact, which is my preferred way of approaching these things, where you tap to interact something like a door, or to interact with a piece of equipment, but you hold down square to reload your weapon. That is my preferred way of doing things. You also want effectively all of these settings to be one-to-one. Feel free to copy them as you see them on screen. And then moving all the way down, you have Flick Look, and you can adjust this if you want to be a little bit faster and snappy, should you decide to use the Flick Look feature that allows you to instantly snap in a certain direction. Next, we have to go all the way down and ignore the rest of these pages. We will get to these, for example, the ground vehicles and how those sensitivities work, but for the most part, you want to completely ignore every single one of these pages and go straight on down to controller tuning. Now, in controller tuning, I personally turn off all vibration, but the critical thing that you want here is having your center dead zone as low as possible and leaving your axial dead zone around 6. Now, your center dead zone should be as low as you can get it without introducing stick drift, and you'll know if you have stick drift, where if this value is low enough, the controller will just move by itself without you even touching it. Now, 2 is the lowest I can go. I can probably actually go as low as 0, but I personally like having a small minor central dead zone, and that's the exact setting I use. The axial dead zones cancel out movement when you're moving your stick horizontally so that it doesn't go up and down by mistake. I leave this at about 6. I don't like having really high axial dead zones. I don't like having really low ones either. I think this is the sweet spot. Now, some of you may be lucky and find that you're going to have effectively a straight copy pasta from all of these individual settings across your ground vehicles, your transport vehicles, and your aircraft, and your helicopters, and your gunners, and all of the other various menus that there are for these things. But if that isn't the case and you aren't so lucky, you are going to have to go individually back into the game, adjust these values, get them back to where they need to be to make sure that they're all correct, make sure that the ratios are correct, like having this set to 56, and then just essentially making sure that everything is perfectly fine. So like 178 on this value here, and just getting it all in the right place. In terms of the input curve here, again, you want to look for those BF1, BF4 options. Those are going to give you the best things that you're looking for. And if you have the choice between BF1 and BF4 in the vehicle stick acceleration input presets, I would go with BF1 and drop it down to around about 20%. This is effectively going to make your movement on the gunner various items of tanks and things like helicopters one-to-one with your actual infantry aiming movement, which I again believe is better for general muscle memory. Now, if you find that you prefer having your vehicle turret being a little bit slower, again, simply just scroll down the aim assist, aim sensitivity slider to give you a less snappy experience and give you a little bit more fine-tuned control. But you want these to be the same, and the reason you want these to be the same with your infantry movement is all about building muscle memory and all about putting it all in the right place. Same in terms of like your general keybinds, you just want to build up that sort of general utility and general reactiveness. In other menus like transports, you'll find that essentially once you have set your vehicle options for ground vehicles, it should more or less copy over one-to-one for the rest of them. And it should give you pretty much all the same vehicle settings across ground, transport, aircraft, helicopters, so on and so forth. It's worth having a double check though, just to make sure that those values have fully come across, and there are some slightly more fine-tune options for some of you who are particular about what kind of piloting you're doing in order to get that done. Next, let's talk about your infantry controller mapping, and in terms of the actual buttons you'll be using for your character on the ground. Now, I used two distinct differences in this game that make me play a little bit differently. The first thing is that I switch my triggers with my bumpers, so I prefer to aim and shoot with L1 and R1 instead of L2 and R2. And if you want to do that as well, you simply have to scroll through all of these settings, find anything that was previously set to L1 or L2, and then swap them over. So in this example, this was previously set to L1, it's now L2 because I'm a bumper shooter. You don't have to make that change though, it's all personal preference, there is no necessary benefit to using that kind of setup, it's all just about how you prefer to play. Now there are a few critical things that I would recommend everybody does though. For example, changing your crouch, sliding, and your prone all to be this option R3. So now, when you go into the game and click into your right analog stick, you can crouch and prone. And then on the inverse of that, you want to swap the melee button, which was previously set to R3, to circle. This is effectively the equivalent of playing tactical in Call of Duty, where you melee with circle and you crouch and prone with the R3 button, which is objectively, in my opinion, better than anything else that you can use. If you're somebody who has paddles as well, you may also want to consider what you want to bind those paddles to, and you may even want to consider having your crouch and prone bound to a paddle instead of using your R3. But for the average person, I still think that sort of tactical layout is much better. Now, there is another thing you're going to want to change in this setting. Specifically, you're going to want to find the weapon mounting and change that to down on your D-pad. You also want to change your firing mode and zeroing to right on the D-pad. Now, essentially what this means now is that if you are in the game and you're somebody who is sliding around or you're proning with your R3 stick, you now still can mount your weapon by aiming down sight, pressing down on the D-pad, and boom, you now have the benefit of weapon mounting. Now, the reason you have to change your fire mode here is that when you ADS, those are the same bind. So I changed mine to right on the D-pad, which means I can now change my fire mode and mount my weapon while still being able to use slide. For those of you who played the beta, there is no longer the bug where pressing the melee button is going to send you into a crouch or a prone anymore. That's been fixed. That's something I spoke to the devs about quite a lot. The next major thing is talking about the rest of your keybinds for all of the other options. Now, we've already talked about the infantry ones, which is the soldier buttons, but for vehicles and for pretty much everything else that isn't gunners and transports, I recommend using alternate. Now, I really dislike the modern era of Battlefield where they try to get you to accelerate and sort of do your yaw and lean all off of the analog sticks. In my opinion, accelerating and braking should always be L2 and R2, and firing and zooming should always be L1 and R1. So if you're somebody who prefers having full camera control and also full aiming control on your analog sticks, and having acceleration set to your triggers, which is, in my view, how it should be, you want to set alternate for vehicles. You also want to set the same alternate for aircraft. You're going to leave gunner as default because that doesn't need to change. Transports you're going to leave as default as well because acceleration and braking is the triggers by default. And then for the helicopters, your throttle up and throttle down, again, you want that to be alternate. This means that you can now accelerate and decelerate by using the triggers on your controller, and you can fire using L1 and R1, etc., or zoom and fire, and it just makes for a better system. This is an infinitely better system, in my view, than anything else that you see at the moment, and I genuinely believe that trigger for acceleration and deceleration and braking is a far better format to play Battlefield in. Next, you're going to want to go to the gameplay tab, and there actually is some pretty important stuff hidden there. So you can pretty much copy all of these one for one. I, for example, have crouch toggle sprint set to crouch, and essentially what this means is that when you go to sprint, if you are already crouched, you will stay crouching. Now, because I slide and dive around using my R3 stick, this is a system that just makes sense. You also have a couple of other options like slide to interact, and if you prefer the peeking, you can actually turn peeking completely off. So if you're somebody who doesn't like how the sort of game navigates your weapon around certain objects, that can be completely disabled. Moving all the way down, though, you can see all of the other settings that have crossed over and how that all works, and that's pretty much it. This is a one-to-one copy of pretty much all the other settings that you've seen, and you can even do really cool things like disabling the sort of outline on the capture zones. Having that off, for example, just makes you a little bit more immersed in the environment. Now, there are a couple of other things that I do really recommend for controller players, and this is going to look a little bit different for your menus because some of you guys are going to be on PC and some of you guys are going to be on console, but all of you will have the settings that I'm talking about. You're going to want to put weapon motion blur all the way down to 0. You're going to want to put world motion blur all the way down to 0. Camera shake all the way down to 50. You're going to want to reduce sprint camera bobbing 100%. Turn off chromatic aberration, vignetting, and film grain. And that's going to give you a clear visual experience that isn't going to make your aiming or your experience less impactful. You know, it's graphically going to look pretty great, but it's going to take away all of the things that just can make you have some issues. Like, I don't like weapon motion blur, world motion blur. I think it looks terrible. Excessive camera shake is going to put your aim off. Chromatic aberration, vignetting, and film grain are just visual effects that, in my view, don't make for a cleaner system. If you're on PC and you're worrying about your aim as well, you very much want to make sure the vertical sync is set to disabled. I also turn off Infantry HUD motion because I don't like the HUD moving around whilst I'm moving around in the game because I feel it creates a sort of swaying style system, so that's also something. But in the advanced HUD settings, this is something I feel everybody should turn off completely. You want to go into the advanced HUD settings, and then you want to go all the way down to... If you're somebody who's looking for a little bit more fine-tuned control, this is something that I feel everybody needs to turn off. Go into graphics, go into crosshairs and indicators. You're then going to go all the way down to where it says infantry crosshair projection. And you need to set this to disabled. If you have this on, the crosshair basically stays in motion. If you have it off, the crosshair is static in your middle of your screen, and it's going to make it much, much easier to stay on target and much, much easier for muscle memory. You can also change the colors of various things like hit indicators. I personally like to have a slightly different hit indicator if I've landed a headshot, because that's going to give me a more intelligent reason and decision as to whether or not I should challenge an opponent if I've taken more health off of them. And you can mess around with pretty much everything in here, but today those are just the basics. You definitely want a different headshot icon, or color should I say, and you can set that to whatever color you so please. A nice little yellow or an orange in between is pretty good, or something pretty outlandish and pink. You can also change the entire setup of your crosshair, make it thinner, and change the color of it as well if you struggle to see the white on different various white backgrounds, and you can use these images on the right as a reference point. So folks, that's all the settings you need today, and as you can see in this firing range, you're going to get a really nice responsive experience out of this game that is visually going to look good, it's going to give you a much more fine-tuned control over your controller, and it's going to give you everything you need to go into Battlefield 6 on day one. Now, one thing I will reference for those of you who are joining us here on Battlefield 6, and if you haven't played previous Battlefield franchises, Battlefield does have something called spread. And essentially what this means is that if you are in motion and firing your weapon, there are going to be instances where your gun is moving or firing in a way that feels erratic. So I'm going to give you an example here. I'm going to strafe left and right whilst firing at this target down range. And you can see if I'm lucky, I land a couple of shots, but for the most part, it really isn't an accurate predicament. Now, by contrast, if you decide to not move and burst fire your weapon, you're going to get a much more consistent time to kill over range. Now, not moving isn't a necessity, you can still just burst fire while still strafing, but traditionally in Battlefield for the longest range distance targets, you want to stop moving completely and burst fire your weapon. Spread essentially creates a sort of randomness to your weapon in terms of how it bounces around whilst you're moving and shooting, but more importantly it happens when you continuously go full auto over distance and combine all of those elements together. So if it feels like you can't hit anything over range, it's because you're doing exactly what I'm talking about. You're moving, shooting, and full autoing, when in reality you should be microbursting. And this is why I personally use my bumpers. I like to microburst with those bumpers really aggressively. You can see that even though I'm firing my weapon fairly quickly, there actually are individual stops within that burst fire to make me a more accurate player. Now, the amount of values of spread that you're going to have will vary from weapon type to weapon type. Some SMGs will have less, some assault rifles will have more, some ARs, some DMRs. They're all going to have different setups for these things based on the individual variables that DICE decides to put into the game. But at a very fundamental and basic level, if you want to be a highly accurate shooter in this game, not only should you be copying all of those settings and using the aim assist stuff that I've talked about in terms of the dead zones and axial dead zones and how the aim assist has changed, but you want to be burst firing, and you want to be paying attention to spread in Battlefield 6. The spread will improve in time in terms of tuning your weapon, adding more attachments to it, making it more controllable, but for the most part, if you really just want to be highly aggressively accurate out the box, this is the way to do it. Get that burst fire going, be a little bit more stationary on distant targets, but medium range targets, don't feel too worried about how much movement you're inputting into your sticks. So folks, that's it for this video today. If you enjoyed it, I hope you leave a like. Please subscribe as well. We're really on the road to 200k. It's one of my big goals for the year. And feel free to catch me on a live stream as well, both on YouTube and Twitch at TheTacticalBrit. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.